Hello everyone. Welcome to the Institute of Humanities Economics course. This is a foundational course that is essentially developed in order to help the high school student gain a foundational and basic understanding of all the concepts of economics and the building blocks of economics, such that at the end of this course they can be better equipped to not just understand economics but also apply it to their subjects at their high school level. This being the first video, what we will be covering today is a very basic introduction to the subject of economics. We shall go into some very basic discussions on what economics is and what its role is and what are the conceptual elements that you need to understand at the very outset. After which, in the following videos, we will slowly delve more and more into the subject matter of economics, right? So, let us begin today's lecture and take a look at the topics we will be covering today. So, we will begin by discussing what exactly economics is and maybe going through a very brief history of how we have got to the point of where economics stands today as a subject. We will then have a discussion on methodology, where I will highlight the differences between normative and positive methodology, both of which are very different in their approaches, but each very important and together sort of forming the methodology that we use in economics in general, right? So both of them are equally important. We will go through what that implies, right? Then we will talk about some economic methodology in general, right? How it is our subject of economics approaches to answer certain questions, what those questions are and how good we are at sort of, doing or in answering those questions rather, right? So in that respect, we will be talking about what a model is, right, which is the basic idea of what we use for most of our method in economics, right? And lastly, we will be discussing two important concepts. Both of these appear largely in microeconomics but also in macroeconomics as well, right? And this is just generally, so till what is a model, we are having a discussion on what economics is and its method and all of that. But at this point, we will just discuss two important concepts just to start you off on, what a discussion around certain economic ideas might look like, as well as sort of I've picked two very important concepts which will pop their heads time and again in the next modules as well, right? So in that way, it will kill two birds with one stone. So we will discuss two concepts. The first one being rationality under scarcity, and the second one being trade-offs and opportunity costs. So let us begin with today's lecture and the first part of our discussion, that is, what is economics? So as far as definitions go, right, let's start off with a definition given by Alfred Marshall, who is a very famous and great economist himself, right? The definition he gave pretty much sums up, at least as a starting point, what we want to start the discussion with, right? So a social science, what is economics? Economics is a social science directed at the satisfaction of needs and wants through the allocation of scarce resources that have alternative uses, right? So what is very important here is that we pick up the key words, right? So the satisfaction of needs and wants. Over here you can possibly understand it as material needs and wants, right? through the allocation of scarce resources, all of which have alternative uses. Right? So each of these is very important to understand, and we will break down each of them one by one and then sort of, help us understand maybe all of the questions that economics looks to answer. So if you generally, hit a Google search or even go through a textbook in general, a syllabus, you will see there are various areas of economics. Microeconomics, macroeconomics, econometrics, financial economics, behavioral economics, developmental economics, international economics. I can sort of go on and on, right? There are various areas of economics, which may then make you wonder, what exactly is economics, right? How do you put all of these various things into one box? Because very often you'll also see that a lot of these other subjects can be perhaps studied with different degrees which are not in economics, right? You may then have the curiosity, even if you're considering your future studies after this, to specialize in something, what that Venn diagram looks like, right? What exactly is economics then? What are the sort of compartmentalizations and the boundaries of the subject? So essentially, why economics is used so widely, we will see in a second, even when we talk about methodology and its applications, right? How, because it's a predictive social science, it perhaps enjoys applications in a wide range of subjects. Also because it deals with our material sort of life, it is applied in a wide area of subjects. But also in various philosophical and moral discussions, we do sort of require our understanding of what is economic and economic, the subject matter. So coming back to the question then, what is the subject matter? You can pretty much find it in all of these keywords, right? So it essentially, anytime we are talking about the satisfaction of any need or want, right? More often than not, material needs and want, right? And it deals with the allocation also of scarce resources, which means we have to satisfy a certain range of wants. Usually it's also understood as unlimited wants, right? It's said that humankind has humankind has unlimited material wants, right? That's a basic, you can question the scientificness of this statement that I've made, but we'll get into all of that when we talk about methodology, right? Assuming that all human beings then have unlimited wants, right? We're all Madonna and a material girl, in a material world, I guess. But what we're essentially trying to do then is satisfy all these unlimited wants that we constantly have. The issue, however, is that what we have to deal with is the allocation of scarce resources, right? So to satiate these unlimited wants, there aren't unlimited resources, right? There are scarce resources, which means you have to pick and choose from these scarce resources which ones of these wants you will prioritize and why you will prioritize that, right? So essentially the allocation of these scarce resources, all of which, by the way, have alternative uses. Alternative uses, what does that mean? It means, let's say one resource, right? Let's say you have any kind of resource that will have multiple uses, right? So let's say you have unlimited wants. You can't satiate all of them because there are only a limited number of resources. Each of those resources can satiate a different set of wants in themselves. So you have all of these choice sets to make in terms of matching the uses of these resources and the limited number of these resources to prioritize what wants you want in what order, right? And how to maximize this entire issue. Since we have unlimited wants and scarce resources which have alternative uses, what is the best looking allocation, right? Here a word comes in which you'll see later a lot in economics. That is the concept of efficiency, right? So what does efficient allocation then look like, right? What is the best possible, the maximizing possible application of these resources that have various other uses and matching them to the set of wants that we have, right? Can we prioritize these wants in a particular way and then match them to these scarce resources in a manner that makes it an efficient allocation. Now, having understood this, what you must also see is that this general definition then, right, it comes with a method, of course, right? At some point, you can't just be like, okay, this is economics, then how do we go about talking about this, right? There must be some sort of mathematization or process or methodology to understand or to standardize and understand better how to answer this entire question. And we will discuss methodology, like I keep saying. But what we must come to at this point is that this is because this itself covers such a large area of knowledge as far as human beings are concerned, right? Any part of this now, any sub part of this, anything to do with either one of these issues, answer maybe not the whole issue at once, but smaller parts of these questions can then be applied to various other areas, and that's why you will see economic methodology being applied to various areas in our modern world, right? Okay. So now that I've highlighted this entire importance of what we can derive from this one definition in terms of what is economics and what it entails, as well as highlighted the keywords, let us just go through them quickly again. And I want you to sort of now, on your accord, possibly pause the video at various points and sort of corroborate if the answers match, or not even match per se, but what you opinionate on it rather, right? Because that becomes important. It's important for our process that at various points in these discussions, you learn to pause this video and sort of write down on your own accord what you believe, a particular thing is and how it's working, how well it's working or not. Because tomorrow when you become an economist, you will understand that this subject in particular isn't even about rote learning, right? It's largely about understanding how to apply this methodology or these models that we're going to discuss to our real world, right? And we're constantly getting better at understanding how to model human beings and how to predict their behavior, or even just generally how to understand their behavior and their outlook. So if you get that sort of connection in terms of how we are using our method, what economics is, right, then you will be better economists tomorrow. And that process starts with you sort of learning to critique and opinionate everything that's discussed here today, right, and in any of the lectures. So we'll do the exercise in the beginning now, right? And then from the following topics, I want you to be able to do this process by yourself, right? So the keywords that we've seen in the discussion till now about the definition of economics is the following: scarcity and choice. What is the implication of the scarcity of resources and the choices that we have to make, therefore, from those scarce resources? Unlimited wants with limited resources. What is the implication of that? Problems of living in a community, right? Underlying resource costs and consumer benefits. Now this is something I want you to apply yourself a little bit more, right? It's within these keywords and this understanding we've discussed till now. But I'm now extending what the scope of economics is to some more sentences in terms of, I'm saying it also involves, let's say, problems of living in a community, right? Essentially the underlying resource costs and consumer benefits. So how do you think this discussion that we've had about what economics entails can be extended to resolving these sort of issues, right? The answer actually lies in what we've already talked about. And this is where I want you to apply yourself a little bit. And again, the next point, right, what is the scope or the definition of economics also includes, now I'm saying, coordination of activities of production and consumption, etc. Right? So we'll study a lot about production and consumption. Where does production and consumption, say, fit into this definition that we've already talked about in terms of what economics entails? Right? So I hope you can sort of work on this a little bit by yourself. At this point, we will go into the next part of our discussion, that is the history of the subject of economics, or rather talk about how the tradition of economics has reached the point where it currently stands, right, in our current time. So, essentially, questions about material welfare, right, how to make sure everybody has a good life, or how to maximize your own material wants through life, all of these general questions, right, what should our relation be in terms of our material life to the rest of our life, our other aspects of life, what is the relation of our material life to our other aspects of life. All of these questions are not questions that are entirely new as far as human civilization is concerned. Even before modern economics existed in its current condition, from the ancient Greek sort of civilization and various other civilizations as well, but essentially from ancient times, perhaps as a part of a discussion under politics or political economy, or under philosophy and moral philosophy, perhaps under different categories or names as far as subjects are concerned. The subject matter of economics, however, has been discussed for a long time as far as our human history is concerned. However, right, or another example here, I said during Greek times, but also you can trace back even in our own Indian history, right, something like the Arthashastra being written by Chanakya pretty much shows that there was at least the existence of some understanding and analysis of the economic side of life, right, how the questions that we said economics deals with was dealt with, right. It may have been in the purview of those times or to a particular area, right. Maybe there was a lot of work on, say, economics of war, which is still big now, but was a central sort of hypothesis at that point. But in some way or the other, human civilization through most of history has been thinking about economic questions. However, in its modern form, right, where we understand that this tradition of economics branched out and became its own subject in the modern form that we are studying today through high schools and various degrees and postgraduate degree colleges, was at the time of Adam Smith, right. In fact, Adam Smith is known as the father of economics, right, because from him we say that this tradition of economics, or the subject of economics, at least modern economics, was born, right. So Adam Smith was, interestingly, a professor of moral philosophy, actually, right, in the University of Glasgow. This was before economics existed as a subject, so he was a professor of moral philosophy. After him, the subject of economics was born as an area. He wrote two cornerstone books, right, which shaped our thinking as far as economics is concerned. One is the Theory of Moral Sentiments, and one is the Wealth of Nations, right. In fact, more often than not, you will see most books and texts on economics start from the Wealth of Nations, right. A lot of arguments for the current neoliberal, capitalistic, invisible hand sort of economics, right, laissez-faire economics, is traced to its basic ideas in Wealth of Nations, right, where Adam Smith does talk about division of labor, specialization, how a nation can basically get wealthy, and he sort of advocates for this capitalistic system with a invisible hand sort of operating. But often what is forgotten is the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which was Adam Smith's first book, where he covers where empathy occurs from in human beings, looks to answer deeper questions on, is man primarily selfish, right, and what does that selfishness imply then in terms of his behavior, what kind of limited benevolence man has and what that implies for their behavior. So he traces our idea of validating why the system should be in this free market capitalistic style, right? He didn't get into the neoliberal market. That is where it has led us to today, right? But this sort of invisible hand laissez-faire economics that he sort of talks about in Wealth of Nations that started off our trajectory into economics actually begins at theory of moral sentiments, where he traces why he believes man is of a particular nature, right? How empathy works, how that gets into selfishness, how we are wired to be primarily selfish with a limited benevolence. And then from that, he argues into why he believes then, with such a nature of mankind, this is the only system that must work and how that system will look like, right? So he's obviously worked on a lot of other areas through these books, but this is just an interesting backstory to sort of get you all started in terms of where all of this comes from, right? We will discuss in greater detail when we are talking about, even political economy and the structure of society, some of these details about the nature of man and the nature of the system and its relationship. But this is where, at least for now, it's just more of a story mode where you just need to appreciate perhaps where the subject is coming from, right? So this was all about Adam Smith and how this turn to modern economics started. Since Adam Smith, of course, the subject has grown into various areas to solve various questions as well, using this methodology that we have slowly developed in economics. We'll talk about it, but it's also developed into becoming more and more interdisciplinary, right? So from that time of Adam Smith, we have developed a certain method. That method took us a certain way into neoliberal sort of understandings, into classical economics, neoclassical economics. We've had various schools of thought over time and geographies, right? And through this time, economics has become more interdisciplinary as well, right? So we've not just polished our own methodology, but learned how to borrow the better parts of, methodology from other subject areas of knowledge and social sciences and so on and so forth. Right, so we've had various schools of thought, like I said, across time and geography, right? Depending on maybe what was going on in history, which country these economists were hailing from, whether it was recessions that they were living through, or whether it was a boom time, whether it was depression, so on and so forth, influenced various schools of thought, right? These schools of thought differ across time, across geographies, right? Sometimes at the same time you had two different schools of thought fighting it out in terms of what the correct way of resolving something is. But it's become a rich tradition is what I'm trying to highlight essentially, right? Since that time that we're tracing through history, over time we've seen various schools of thought, Keynesian, Austrian, the Chicago School of Thought, so on and so forth, as well as various theories, not just macroeconomic schools of thought, even in microeconomics and environmental and financial economics, we have different economists suggesting different ideas, and it's become a very vast and rich tradition, right? Another important thing that over history has happened is economics has got more and more mathematized, and why that has happened is because it's not that there aren't other areas of economics which perhaps perhaps work with more descriptive areas of these questions or normative areas of these questions. We'll come to these understandings also in a minute. But one thing that you must see has happened is it has got a little mathematized, and that's why we go into our economic models and how those apply to the real world as well. And why is that? Right, it's very easy to be like, you'll often hear a lot of social science students say that, oh, economics out of the social science is the most mathematized and therefore the hardest, and perhaps some may even wonder why it is mathematized if it's a social science. And the answer lies in the fact that it is a predictive sort of subject, right? It deals with predictive models. Because we're dealing with our material wants and because there are scarce resources, where this subject has led is to understanding predictive models, right? So that we can understand where these, what we are going to call economic variables, and understand in a second, where these sort of economic variables are moving and what those trends are and why those trends are a particular way, right? So in order to predict anything, when you're trying to predict behavior or predict where, let's say, the price of something is going to go, so on and so forth, when you're trying to predict human behavior or prices or any such economic variables, there has to be a certain degree of mathematization that comes into the subject, almost as a necessity in order to make predictive models, right? So that doesn't mean we ignore normative questions or we ignore our understandings of causality, right? Something like causality does play an important role in prediction, but essentially we're just talking about where economics has gone, right? We will get into all of these issues in themselves, have a discussion in some module or the other, right? Which is why I said in this introductory chapter, just try to, listen to the story, keep with the story, think about what any of these things may make you what your opinion on them maybe at this point of time, right? In fact, we will do an exercise where we can compare how you looked at some of these things now after today's lecture, and then at the end of the entire course, right? Yeah. Okay. So lastly, this is a question which we will keep answering over and over again, and something which, like I said, I want you to think about now and then think about again at the end of our course. For a lot of these questions, but even this one in particular, that is, what is the role in its current form in our world of economics, right? It plays a big role. We have, huge, our entire system's backbone is a financial banking system, which highly is, based on our economic understanding of the world and our subject of economics. So it plays a big role in our current world, of course. And not just in finance, but in various other areas, because its methodology of being able to mathematize and have predictive models within some understanding of social science has been so revolutionary, if I can call it that, right? That the methodology of economics, and it's not a fight that I'm trying to start, that like, oh, economics did this. Perhaps it was being done in other places too, but this particular methodology is something which is widely applicable in our complex world that we live in today, the society that we live in today, in terms of the material world and the financial world, even more so, right? So it's a very, very important subject in that sense. I'd like you also to think about what else you can sort of come up with in terms of what you think is the importance of economics or the role of economics in our world today, right? So this was our basic discussion on what economics is and the history of economics. Next, we will be talking about methodology, right? So what does methodology mean? It means, how are we doing this subject, right? We've understood the subject matter, we've understood generally what is the area or the kind of question we want to resolve, right? Methodology implies how are we going about doing this, right? So we'll talk about maybe how in general the idea of knowledge may work and where economics' fit is in all of that, right? How good is economics in answering that question, essentially? That's what method is trying to look at, right? We talked about the question, right? Say, for example, the economics is dealing with this unlimited wants and limited resources, limited resources being available and how to sort of economize that. How good we are at answering that question, right? What is the method of knowledge we are using to get to our answers is what we are going to be talking about now, right? So, like I said, we've already talked about what are we trying to study in economics. Now, under method, what we are going to be discussing is how are we going about doing that, right? How are we going about our methodology? So, for instance, how are we actually verifying and justifying, right? How are we verifying and justifying our conclusions to be true or representative of the real world? Now, these are all some heavy words, but try to think about what they may mean, right? How are we verifying and justifying? So, obviously, when I say verifying, I'm talking about an empirical conclusion possibly, and when I'm saying justifying, I'm talking about a normative conclusion possibly. are conclusions, right? We had these problems, are conclusions to be true or representative of the real world, right? So I am not going to go into a discussion on what is truth. This is something you can Google and is a whole philosophical conversation in itself, right? I'd highly encourage you to, before you begin, in fact, any social science, look into these basic ideas, right? It's called theory of knowledge and epistemology. It's essentially understanding how knowledge works and then what is the role of a science or a social science within that space of our human knowledge, right? In that sense, then you will not be just rote learning or even dogmatized into any of these bodies of knowledge, but understand how it is operating, why it is saying something, and yourself be able to contribute more wholesomely, right? So these are things which you by the age of 15, 16 should have, had some curiosity and looked up by yourself. But what is truth? Let's say what is knowledge, right? Please look up any internet resource, any encyclopedia of philosophy, and you will sort of have some amount of reading to do. But essentially then, we are talking about these, how we are answering this question, and in answering that, when we reach a conclusion, how good is our method in understanding whether something is true, right, or representative of the real world, which means whether our conclusion of understanding some model is what is actually happening in the real world with people. When we are predicting human behavior through a model, is that what is actually happening in the real world, right? Like I said, truth is much heavier, so I'm not going to get into that. But essentially, we are talking about when I have a model that gives me a conclusion that this is how people are going to behave, or this is how the prices are going to go up, does that really happen in the real world? Or alternatively, it doesn't have to be in a predictive model, it can be in a descriptive model as well, which is basically the other way around. Some phenomenon is occurring in the real world, right? And how good is our explanations on the causes of this phenomenon, right? Then we get more about truth than representation. When we are predicting, more often than not, we are talking about how representative is it of the real world, right? Or even in causality, but then, it can work in both ways, right? When we are trying to understand a phenomenon or when we are trying to predict, how good are we at it? Are we really getting to the causality? Are we really understanding why something's happening, right? And then also, are we predicting how that's going to sort of behave in the future well enough once we've understood its behavior? So this is what the method of economics or the method of any subject essentially deals with, right? What is the kind of questioning you are doing? Now, why am I having this discussion is essentially you need to be doing this in every chapter from this point of time, right? Why is method so important? Is because now from this point onwards, anything else that I discuss or in any of the modules that we may be running you through, you must take a minute and think about this question, right? Be it in science or social science, any theory, law, model, so on and so forth, how good is it at actually predicting what is happening or actually understanding, as the case may be? Some models are predictive, some models are descriptive, whatever, right? It sets out to do one of these things. How good is it at actually understanding what is really happening or what may be true in that particular situation, right? So it's essentially a test of our knowledge system. So that is something you should be doing at every point whenever any new knowledge comes to you, even economics for that matter. So within economics then, right, I'm narrowing down a little bit more now and talking about methodology in economics particularly, right? So starting off, I'm saying there are two kinds of method in economics, right, which we largely follow. We can put all of the method that we have in economics under two big compartments. Not watertight compartments, by the way, because a lot of analysis involves some amount of positive and some amount of normative discussion, right? But first, what is positive and normative method? What are they used for? And what are their implications? Right? So let's start with positive method. So positive is essentially, it involves all descriptive and all of that, right? Any descriptive idea of society or so on and so forth, but it essentially deals with what is, right? So this can be descriptive models, or in economics what we largely have is empirical models, right? That is, it comes from empirics. Normative, on the other hand, deals with what ought to be or what should be. Alright, and it's a keen difference, because see here, when you're doing positive or what is, you need to be doing, let's say, mathematized research, right, or research over figures and numbers, or even if it's qualitative research, you're going out and finding out what is the case in our real world, and then the model is trying to, or your understanding is trying to understand something about that, or what is going to happen thereof. It can be predictive, right? Even your predictive models largely come under positive economics, right? But essentially we are trying to understand what is happening in the real world, right? It has something to do with that. Normative economics is when you are answering questions on what ought to be the case or what should be the case, right? So it has something to do with a norm. What is a norm? Some agreed upon rule or regulation, right? That's what a norm is. So how are we agreeing upon what ought to be the case or what should be the case, right? So some amount of normative economics, the moment you're getting into methodology, you've already started, because you're already asking the question, how should economics be done, right? So in any subject, whenever we are dealing with ought or should questions, we're doing normative methodology. When we are dealing with what is the case, we're doing positive methodology, right? Now what is the significance of this sort of understanding beyond how should you do economics, right? Let's say something like welfare economics, right? Largely normative, right? Compare that to public economics. So let's say you're the government now, one single agent, right? You're a government economist, or you're the government economist. Now when you're doing positive economics or doing some area of public economics, you are talking about, let's say, how much to increase your government expenditure, right? And what is the effect of that, let's say, on the economy on various variables, right? If you increase your government expenditure, will the money supply increase or decrease? Will the prices of commodities increase or decrease, right? You have to do some sort of study to understand that, right? Before you spend more money on something, increase your government expenditure, you may want to understand what will be the effects of that, right? Whom it will affect, how it will affect them, as well as how the general economy will be affected. If as the government you spend more money, there's going to be more money in the economy. What is the effect of that? What is the effect on prices? Maybe what is the effect on your currency? Right? What is the effect on the general state of the economy, right? Because you spend more money, is the economy now growing more, right? Or because you are the government and you've now spent more than you're earning, is that actually having a bad effect or a detrimental effect on the economy, right? So you use models, you do studies, you do researches in order to answer this question as the government. Now as the same agent, as the government itself, you also have to answer, how should you spend that money, right? Should you be spending it on increasing defense? Should you be increasing, let's say, welfare activities? That means, and by this welfare and this welfare I mean totally different things, but by this I mean, you know, maybe subsidies and things like that, helping poor people out with subsidies. Right? Or should you spend on education and health? Should you provide free healthcare and education? Right? And when you are answering these questions, it involves justifying why you've picked that answer. Right? Remember, even in methodology we said, right, you have to be able to justify, right, your conclusion, especially in the normative case, right? Verify or justify how good your method is depending on positive or normative. Now it can click in even in this, right? Why I said justify or verify. But in these cases, you have to justify then, right? If you are this government economist, why are you've increased your expenditure? Why have you spent most of it on defense, right? Why have you spent on this or this or this? How have you spent on this? Let's say some countries give their citizens free healthcare and education, some don't, right? What is the difference in those philosophies? Why does one set of people think that the government should do this and it's part of their responsibility, right? What are the justifications they are giving for that? That this should be how the government behaves. This ought to be how the government behaves. The government ought to give us free healthcare, right? So those discussions fall under normative methodology, right? So we're going to discuss all of these issues that are brought up as question marks. You can start thinking about answers to right now. There are chapters where each of these are discussed individually, right? But at that point, I want you to be able to do these sort of relations yourself, right? Understand when methodology is jumping from here to here, because our discussions will be pretty seamless, right? Understand how maybe for the same government economist, they have to make all of these positive decisions and normative decisions. These may be discussed in different modules, right? Just one part of these may be discussed in different modules. But what is this relation and how we are coming about this entire area, right? How is it related, or why are we saying, yeah, this is how economics is working, right? That sort of clicking should happen for you at that point very seamlessly and very easily, because you have sort of, had this grasped really well, right? So that is the intention of this sort of an introductory class even. I hope you all are with me till now. Okay, because if there are any confusions, please go back and listen to those sections again, because most of this subject we are building, it's sort of like from the foundation we keep building floors on top. So it's essential that you understand the basics. Right, so that was our discussion on positive and normative method then, right? What are they used for various areas? You can see I gave you one example. What are their implications? Again, something for you to think about, right? We've discussed it. Keep working on it. Okay. The next area that we will be discussing under methodology is what is a model, right? So we've done positive and normative economics. Now I'm largely focusing on positive economics. We will do a lot of normative discussion as well, right? But very particular to the subject of economics is this predictive modeling and this positive methodology in particular. So delving a little bit into that, I'm going to talk about what is a model, right? It is the basic block of how we do economics. Right. So before I get into the economics methodology and what is a model, let's start with science, right? I said that what we are trying to do in economics is make predictive models, right? Which means we are trying to create some sort of model which will make predictions for us, right? Where a particular economic variable or a certain behavior will go. Why is a human being behaving a particular way? Can we predict that? Especially in terms of material wants and so on and so forth. Can we understand their behavior towards their material wants and how they are satiating them? Right? Or even it may be some economic variable like in macroeconomics, and how that, even those macroeconomic variables, by the way, are some measurement which involves human behavior, by the way, right? When we're talking about how prices will go up or down, we are talking about, yes, certain technical relations as well, but also certain behavioral relations to certain products or speculative relations of people, so on and so forth, right? So there are always, even these economic variables have some component of human behavior and that social science side of it, but how that economic variable will then behave in the future, right? Will it rise or fall, or what the trend will look like and why the trend will look like that. So these predictive models that we are trying to create in economics around people, before we understand how these models can be created, how can you capture the idea of predicting anything like that. We're going to talk about a little bit about science and induction. Right, by this what do I mean? So in science we have the method of induction, right, which means we try to induce results such that we can have scientific laws, right. How do you come about a scientific law is through a process of induction, right. Something very important that we'll also come to in the next slide is the idea of falsifiability in science. Right, now I'm not going to get into each of these discussions in great depth, right. I'm just going to tell you what they are, because like I said, each of these are things you can Google and is a treasure trove in itself as a subject and a discussion, right. So in a science now, it becomes fairly easy once, at least in a certain part of science, I'm not talking about quantum and all of that, but a certain part of science, once you establish some sort of induction, you can then establish a scientific law. What do I mean by this? I mean, let's say Newton has established the law of gravity. Now, once something is a scientific law, right, once you've established this induction, right, which works through the idea of testing and falsifiability, right, once you've done that, what you will get is a scientific law, right, through induction. Let's say the law of gravity, right, simplest example to start off. We all know the story of how Newton had an apple fall on his head, so on and so forth. But once gravity is a scientific law then, right, once this induction has occurred where Newton knows that when there is a body which is in free fall, there is a gravitational force that is operating on it, right, a gravitational force of this earth, right. So if body is in fall, right, then gravity will work on it, right. That is an inductive sort of a relation that has been established. Again, you can look up if you are really interested, induction versus reduction, right. The key difference here being, you can see from English itself, you have, when you induce something means you are taking it from one example and then doing multiple examples and then establishing it as a law, right. So you've induced that this is the case. Deduction is the opposite of that. When you have a general law, right, and you're trying to solve for one particular case how something will happen and predict, you say that, oh hey, because of that law I can deduce this is going to happen, right. So once you've had a law, say for example, right, now you know that it's not just apples, right. Newton found it out for apples, but it's not just apples gravity works for. Now you can deduce. If somebody tells you, hey, there is a pen over here, right, and it's kept inside a little cylinder, right, which goes all the way to the ground. When I leave the pen doesn't actually go down because of gravity, right. So you know there's some other force going in the other way, or you know it may be vacuum, so gravity isn't operating in a particular way, right. How do you know that? Because now you're deducing. You've already induced a law through scientific process, right, and now you're deducing that, hey, this, in this particular case, this is how it works because I've deduced it from the general law. So when cases build the law, it's induction. When you're solving a particular case or predicting a particular case from a law, it's deduction, right. So why is this important? Because let's say once Newton established or induced this law of gravity, now no matter where anybody else repeats it, right, that law holds good. And this is where testing and falsifiability comes in, right. This is actually something Einstein had also argued for, that a science must necessarily be testifiable and falsifiable, right. It must go through this testing and falsifiability, which means once something is, a hypothesis is being established as a law through this sort of induction, it should be it can be tested anywhere and the results should be the same, right. Whether you do this at home, somebody goes and does it from a balcony, somebody does it from a mountain, right. If you drop an object today, it will fall to the ground because of gravity, right. It is, you can test this law anywhere else and it will produce the same results, right. And that is a scientific law to do with this physical body, right. Let me give you the example now. If you don't believe me, I'm going to drop this pen and voila, gravity, right. So why are we having this discussion then? Once you understand that This is how science is working, or the method in science is working as far as knowledge is concerned. The next question that you must have is, can we apply this to our social science method? Right? Because remember, when you are dealing with any descriptive model in any social science, right? When you're trying to understand the causality of something, right? A person behaves a particular way or something happens and you're trying to explain why it happened that way, right? Then perhaps you won't feel this pressure of how scientific you must be, right? I'm not saying you can't do that in a scientific way, but it becomes of utmost importance when you are having a predictive model, right? To question to what degree or to what scientific, how scientific is that method, right? Because essentially you're dealing in predicting something, right? You're going to say something will happen. The question that then comes is, can we sort of predict human behavior in the same way? And obviously the answer is no, right? You can't establish this sort of an induction relationship, right? You can't establish this sort of a law like we do in science for human behavior, right? If I keep dropping this pen 10 times over, it will fall in the same way. If I go do this in the room adjacent to me, it will still have the same result. If I take some other object and try to do the same thing, right, it will still have the same result. If I take a pencil or something else, right, it will have the same result, because it's that sort of a scientific law. This is not what is happening when you're trying to predict human behavior, right? When you are buying something, you will not behave the same way twice, right? You may or may not buy the same thing twice in the same shop, right? Because of a variety of reasons, right? If we tell you to do any particular thing, you may behave very differently one time and very differently another time. Similarly, forget your own behavior from time to time. You will behave very differently from a friend or a classmate or a brother, who in the same circumstance may behave very differently, right? So, yes, in economics we try to question, have we understood something about man's nature that is so inherent that we can then make these predictions based on that, right? Yes, we try to understand in a mathematical sense what are the errors that we are not accounting for, how good can our prediction be, and we do make it more and more realistic in that sense, but it can never be as good as science, right? So we can't have induction in that sense when we're talking about human behavior. So the method that economics follows is called hypothetico-deductivo, right? Sounds like a fancy word, but what it essentially means is that we cannot establish, the scientific laws that I just talked about in terms of gravity and all of that through induction, right? This cannot be done for human behavior as we've just discussed. So what can be done? We can have a hypothesis, right? We can have a hypothesis, and from this hypothesis then we can deduce our results on a case to case basis. This hypothesis, right, we can make it into an economic law through testing it in society, right? We can make a hypothesis into an economic law by verifying it empirically or by understanding the causality behind it. Both cases exist, right? You can say, oh, man is rational, man is selfish, he will obviously choose this, right? And then try to understand, if he didn't choose that, why he didn't choose that, right? In something like, let's say, a behavioral an ultimatum or a dictator game. So essentially then what we are saying is, because we can't have these inductive models, we have a hypothesis which we can then sort of make into an economic law with an understanding that it more or less works in society, right? We do test it and verify it for falsifiability in society, which is our lab, right? You don't have labs like in science. The lab for a social science is society, right? You see how things are operating in a market or a community, and then you get results from it. So we have a hypothesis, then we test that hypothesis, and if it works in a good enough number of cases, we have an economic law. But an economic law, unlike a scientific law, isn't a case where you've established induction that if X then Y necessarily will be true, right? It's more of a tendency, it's more of a case basis that like it's more likely to occur with a certain percentage. And then we also have a way of, in various models, understanding what our ad hoc hypotheses may look or what our exception cases may look like, right? When does a particular economic law not apply? Why does it not apply in these particular cases? And there again you have discussions on how important, let's say on this sort of a, hypotheses and then economic law and then predictive model relationship, how important something like causality is versus mathematization and statistics, right? If a model can predict something 9 out of 10 times, is it important that we actually understand the causality behind why something is happening, right? People are divided on this. Some people obviously believe only if you understand why something is happening can you truly predict it well, right? But these are all sort of limitations of human knowledge and how we are working around them. All discussions we will keep coming back to, right? But coming back to our discussion of economic models, then I said there is scientific induction, but that is not directly matching with how we can predict human behavior. So what we do in economics is hypothetico-deductivo. We come up with a hypothesis, test it in society, right? The hypothesis itself can be, which we come up with has come from possibly some causal understanding or some economic theory itself, right? Then we test it in society. If it is working good enough number of times, we have an economic law, right? And these economic laws then further help us later when we are making hypotheses because they become economic theory, right? Because like I said, we are building, right? Economics is a subject which builds on certain foundations and then makes more things. So once something's become an economic law, then it goes back to becoming economic theory and sources that we're drawing new hypotheses from again, right? As well as on a case-to-case basis, when something occurs, we are deducing from these economic laws and economic theories why something, or we're trying to predict why something will go a particular way or why it will behave a particular way. Right? So essentially, we are getting these economic laws then from these hypotheses and then trying to make predictive models. Right, we're trying to make predictive models to understand how a variable is going to behave a particular way. Right, in those models, sometimes our laws help. Like I said, there's a certain circular relation to this. Right, models help us establish laws as well because it helps us understand how certain variables go. At the same time, we use those economic laws and economic theories to further make more models and then predict where, maybe more complex variables or other variables will go. So, with this sort of understanding, we come to the question of what is an economic model. So an economic model, by definition, is a simplified description of reality designed to yield an hypothesis about economic behavior that can be tested, right? So like I said, in our hypothetico-deductivo model, right, you have a hypothesis that then gets tested, and once it's true, it becomes what is an economic law or economic theory in a sense. So before this, what you have is an economic model. Right, it's a simplified description of reality that is designed to yield this hypothesis that we are then going to test, right? And here the keywords you need to pay attention to is simplified description of reality, right? Which means, what do we mean by simplified? It means this is why essentially we are calling it a model, right? So let's say there is something that is happening in the real world which is very, very complex. We are trying to break that down, deconstruct it into maybe various isolated relationships or variables and so on and so forth, which is what we are calling a model, right? So a model explains some amount of behavior of the total behavior in the real world perhaps, right? And why are we doing simplified models? Because then that can be extrapolated further and then we can further understand. Once we understand how something is working, we can keep including more and more complex relations and further sort of understand more and more complex things, right? That's the idea of how this sort of how models work, and you'll have simpler models, and then once those simpler models are, let's say, more accepted, widely accepted, they're applied in making more and more complex models to explain more complex things. right? Like I said, the keywords you need to pay attention to is the simplification and an abstraction of the real world, right? Now again, this is a new word that is coming here, but essentially it's what I've already discussed, right? What is an abstraction? It means it's not the whole real world, but a certain part of it, right? You've done an abstraction of the real world to create a model, right? We've already discussed all about hypothesis testing and scientific nature of an economic model. Now we come to the concept of economic variables. I keep using this word over and over again in the discussion. So I thought I should, like, at some point stop and tell you what an economic variable is. An economic variable is essentially a measurement that helps us determine how the economy functions, right? So for example, poverty rate, inflation, growth, income, these are all economic variables that we have created. This is what we are trying to use about in our models to understand various things about our economic life and society, and predict also their movements and their trends, as well as what causes them and what are their interrelations and dependencies, right? And hence in that way we have, in a model you can have a dependent or an independent variable, right? What is a invariably in a model what you have is a dependent variable, right? Which means this is what we are trying to figure out in that model or predict the behavior of, right? Because we'll say, let's say income over here is affected by, or is a total of certain other variables, right? So here income becomes the dependent variable because we are studying a model to understand income and its behavior, where it's going to go in the future, right? The other things we are saying that is causing income to behave a particular way or is influencing income to go a particular way are the independent variables in this model. And like I said, they in themselves may be other economic variables we've constructed to understand, right, and have their own models in themselves, right? So they may be a dependent variable in some other model to explain how it works. But this is where the abstraction works, right? Because all of this now is working in the real world. Like all of these have their own processes and people are just, going about their business. But we are trying to isolate one thing and understand how this works. Then we'll have another model explaining how this one works, another model explaining how this one works, right? And all of these are working dynamically in the real world, but we are creating models to understand them separately so that, this abstraction and simplification process makes us get what is basically going on, right? Once you get each of these things, you can keep adding them in any dynamic model. Right. So what we are dealing with is how these variables operate and what causes its particular trends, right? This is something we've already discussed. Another interesting thing we often do, since I've talked about simplification and abstraction in our models, is called idealization of variables, right? Idealization invariably goes with isolation. Isolation implying that that variable is actually a part of various dynamic relationships in the real world, but we are isolating it or isolating a particular relationship because that will then help us in a simplified model to predict something or apply it somewhere, right? So we often actually even idealize a variable as opposed to how it may naturally behave dynamically in the real world. We say it's an idealized scenario, right? Which means we hold certain things constant or we isolate it somewhere. So that variable doesn't actually behave in the real world in that same sense, but we have taken an ideal case scenario, so we have idealized the entire variable, right? So this is done usually through a process of, like I said, isolation for instance, or stabilization, where a variable may actually be very volatile in the real world, but we sort of stabilize the way it's behaving, right? Or it behaves in jerks, but we sort of take its behavior to be a smooth trend so that it's easier for our analysis, right? Or decomposition or any other, so on and so forth. Okay, so with that we've come to the end of our discussion on methodology, right? And this was a very, very important discussion, I would say, because like I keep reiterating and I will say it again now, you must understand what is the method of our subject and what we are trying to do, right? What is the endeavor ultimately? so that then you understand its shortcomings or why there are certain shortcomings also, right? Now you know that there are certain shortcomings which will naturally occur because you can't predict human behavior the way you can predict gravity, right? There's going to be fallout of that. So it's always an endeavor on how to do this social science better, how to make predictive modeling better. And once you understand these bare blocks of, this is our endeavor, this is what we are trying to do in economics, and this is how we are going about it, you can not just critique existing methods but also work on improving them, right? And in all the chapters, even for your course, let's not get that far ahead, even for our course, conceptually everything will be much clearer if every time that I discuss a theory here in class or a law, all of this about methodology is going on in your head, right? How real is that law? How did it come about? Is it working in the real world? Why it is working in the real world? Why it isn't working in the real world, right? All of these are basic conceptual questions that you must treat each and every theory and law that I teach you in the next, duration of this course with that level of skepticism and curiosity, right? So if you do that, then the rest of it will pretty much flow really easily to you. So that was the all important section on methodology. What I will do now is briefly introduce two concepts in economics. Both of these concepts will then actually appear in the first few chapters only, right, in the section on microeconomics. But what I want you to do is, now that I conceptually explain it to you really quickly, take that, think about what you think its implications and methodology can be, and then corroborate it when we do it in the actual chapters, right? So the first one is rationality under scarcity. Now, a very important concept in economics is rationality, right? We know that we've already talked about this, that economics deals with how under scarcity the economic agent has to make a choice, right, of allocating resources that have alternative uses. So this economic agent then is always assumed to be rational, right, in the sense that when they are making these choices, right, over these scarce resources and how to satiate these unlimited wants, they will always make reasonable choices, right? Then obviously the question comes, what is it to be rational, or what is it that you are saying is the standard of reasonable choices, right? Now, generally speaking, in most social sciences, we understand rationality as any being that has the consciousness to have goal-seeking behavior, right? Which means you are not just, in the moment all the time. You can have goals and work towards them. If you have that much consciousness, that means you are rational. And that makes sense, right? We're all rational beings, right? We have a consciousness that is arguably, even today in animal consciousnesses, we have research which is showing a certain degree of logic or rationality. So this is the basic definition in social science of what composes rationality. In economics, however, we build a little bit more on that. We have a more narrower or weaker, or stronger definition of rationality. Economic rationality, we've seen more or less, at least through the tradition that has prevailed through the years, talks about perfect rationality of Homo economicus, right? Homo economicus means the perfectly rational economic agent, right? And this agent, Homo economicus, knows how to maximize their best outcome. When they are dealing with these choices around scarce resources, they know how to maximize their best outcome. And they know how to always pick what is good for them and understand more as opposed to less. This is what we are defining as economic rationality. And this, of course, you can see comes with its own set of problems, right? Because inherently what we are doing is that we are putting a set of rules and regulations, which is not always true in the real world. You see, sometimes agents don't maximize what is good for them or pick what is more as opposed to less. There may be a case of ethics or fairness or various other situations where you see people picking the choice that is actually less when there is a choice in the option set which is more, right? So are you then going to say this person is irrational, right? Because it's not matching to the real world. Then there comes this question that then follows from this, in fact, is that if you said economic rationality is this, there is this Homo economicus, and that involves some amount of idealization as well, right? We are idealizing this understanding of rationality, because that's not how it works in the real world, then is this logical set of rules a good understanding of rationality? Should rationality be prescriptive in that sense? Should we, like, and this is a deeper question that runs through most of economics. I want you to think about it as well, right? And that is, if rationality is a logical set of rules that is prescriptive, should that be how we do economics and how we understand rationality? Because inherently, if we are saying in most other cases, rationality is some idea of you having the consciousness to, have goal-seeking behavior. That is what is required of you to be rational. It's just that instrumental rationality. Then when we put this homo economicus condition, when we take stronger conditions that are prescriptive, what happens? Do we just tell people that, hey, you're irrational, right? Oh, you haven't behaved this way that my economic theory is predicting. This means you're irrational. Or should we change economics to understand better what our rationality looks like? If somebody does not behave in the economically rational sense, right, if they do not choose the option that is the maximizing option for themselves, do we try to understand that behavior and incorporate for it in our models? Right? Do we try to describe the rationality that exists in people in our real world, as opposed to prescribing a logical set of rules that constitute economic rationality? Right? Where do you lie on this sort of a debate? Please think about it, and we will build on this when we come to the discussion on rationality in microeconomics as well. Right, the next concept that we come to, which I want you to again think about, because it keeps popping up in various parts of this course, is on trade-offs and opportunity costs. So trade-offs essentially implies that because there are various choices, there have to be trade-offs, right? In this essential basic first definition that we started with, when you have unlimited wants and a scarce number of resources with alternative uses, essentially there are some trade-offs that are there in that choices, right? The moment you choose one thing, you are foregoing something else, right? Because we clearly said that all of these scarce resources have various uses. At the same time, there isn't enough resources to satiate all of your unlimited wants. So therefore, there is some trade-off, right? Every time you are picking something, you are giving something else up. This trade-off, every time you make a choice, every time you pick a choice, what you are giving up in order to pick that choice is what is called opportunity cost, right? So everything has an opportunity cost. Every choice that you make has an opportunity cost, which is what you gave up or what was foregone for making that particular choice, right? Again, this section on opportunity cost also will keep popping up because, like I said, in various parts when you're trying to make these decisions, right? When you're trying to understand efficient allocation, when you're trying to understand how the decision behind these allocation of resources and this, that is going on, we will always be dealing with opportunity costs, right? And it's something that doesn't pop up normally when you're talking of a cost of a thing. You're not talking of everything you've given up for that thing, but it plays a very important role in economics. So I want you to make a note of it, keep it in mind, and whenever you see its application, right, that there is an interesting bit on opportunity costs dealing with a particular problem situation that we're dealing with in later modules, make a note of it under your section in opportunity costs. Right, so that brings us to the end of this introductory video. In the next class, what we will be doing is introduction to microeconomics. I will leave you with a small little note here, however, that is, in your workbook sections, especially for this first chapter, what you will see is instead of a lot of content, you have blank spaces under these various sections. Why that is done is because these, like I said, these sections are important building blocks which will keep popping up in various parts of this course. What I want you to do is fill up maybe a third or half of that space in each answer after our discussion today. right? What you have understood from today's lecture, what you have sort of taken back, I want you to write down there. And then every time something comes up, maybe make a small note of it, add to your understanding on methodology, on rationality, on so on and so forth. And then come back at the end of the entire course and try to answer the question again, right? And at that point, you will see the difference in how much you have possibly understood then, and you know how much of the economic methodology you have originally opined and your critique and all of that, right? So that is why these sections are left blank, because it's sections that I would like for you to work on continuously through various modules, and then in the end have a neat section which has an answer to how you believe these particular things work in economics, right? And not just my discussion on it. Alright, so with that I will leave you and I will see you in the next lecture video. Thank you very much.